Jesse Earl, let's talk about episode 5 of Shogun, which is entitled Broken to the Fist. Let's do quick reactions to the episode. Did you like the episode? Did you not like the episode? And then we will review and recap and spoil the entire episode. What'd you think?
I love this episode and I love the show. I know I came in for the first 2 episodes, so I was on that podcast and I haven't talked about it since, but I've been adoring this show, and every episode is just a feast of fantastic writing and scenes and character development. Like this episode there's like I think it's like a 20-minute or something, a very long like just dinner sequence that's just has so many ups and downs, is incredibly tense, like really surprising. Like and there's moments that breaks my heart. There's big action beats, and this show, it just in the course of an hour, I feel like I have just experienced so much, and it is just truly fantastic on every level.
This is an incredible show. It continues to dazzle. It's pretty much a perfect TV show. I would argue. It's everything I am looking for in a TV show. That last episode and this episode have both had the same formula, which is about in a 55-minute episode, 50 minutes of just people in rooms talking, and then a shocking act of like violence or action. Right?
And they're like, oh gosh, I gotta come back next.
something like shocking and large scale happens, and then that's basically the whole episode. And that is a perfect formula for stuff that I am into personally. I think this show is great. It continues to dazzle each week. It continues to impress each week. It's just really well done on every level, and it's a show that really respects its audience and trusts its audience. Huge extended dialogue sequences that take place in different languages, and it just is like, hey, audience, we're going to just trust that this is so good and so compelling, you're going to come along for the ride. And at least when it comes to the people on Decoding TV, they are accurate. They are correct in that. So let's talk about what actually happens in this episode of Shogun. The episode begins with Toranaga returning back to the scene with like 1,000 guys. And then we discover that Buntaro, Mariko's husband, is alive. Were you surprised, Jesse Earl?
Not in the slightest. When I saw him like go off to the side, I think it was like episode 3 or whatever, where he's just like fighting between houses. I'm like, I didn't see him get his head cut off or anything. He's definitely coming back.
He's alive, and Toranaga commands Buntaro to move in with Mariko, who is currently living with Blackthorn and Lady Fuji. It's gonna get awkward. You can't have Mariko just living with Blackthorn and not her husband. That would be scandalous. So this is obviously the best solution for everyone.
It's a great setup for a sitcom.
Yeah. Toranaga also confronts his son Yoshi Nagakado about his actions. He's upset that his son allowed himself to get used, and gives the analogy of a falcon who could be trained to hunt on another's behalf, which is what gives the episode its title, Broken to the Fist. The idea being that, like, hey, some falcons you can lure with in certain ways, but some falcons you can get to just do all your work for you. And he's worried that his son is used in that way. I think he's more offended that his son let himself get used than he was with the actual outcome of what happened. Right? That was my perception.
Yeah.
At that point, Blackthorn is given the gift of a pheasant from Toranaga, which she interprets as a great honor. Blackthorn then hangs up the pheasant at his house and clumsily says that anyone who touches it in the house should die. Now, Jesse Earl, I was very confused by what all this would like. Why would you hang up a pheasant? Clearly, it's going to start rotting and stinking.
Yeah, that's what I was curious about as well.
So I'm going to read here from our article from Esquire. According to Field and Stream, it's normal to let pheasants mature untouched for a couple days in conditions of 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The decaying process not only makes it easier to skin and feather the bird, but it also tenderizes the meat. Animals experience rigor mortis in the 24 hours after they die, which causes a tightening of the muscles that can lead to tougher meat. That's no bueno. Since it's winter on Shogun and the bird was hanging for only 2 or 3 days at most, I'd say that Blackthorn knew what he was doing, end quote. So there is an explanation for what the hell Blackthorn was doing. Now, whether he was executing this perfectly is up for debate, but I think the spirit of it is that letting it kind of sit there for a little bit was on the path to preparing it for a hearty meal of some kind, right? That's kind of what the implication is. But it is interesting how the show doesn't explain any of that stuff. Like it just expects you to understand all that. So, which I respect. So Buntaro, who is also known as Lord Toda, who is also Lady Fuji's uncle, finally comes to visit the house. He's not happy that he has to live with these people. And he and Fuji have a tense conversation about how she hasn't bedded Blackthorn and how, according to Fuji, the Anjin prefers the company of other women, which I thought was like
Ooh,
kind of a
spicy.
kind of a dig, kind of like
Mhm.
maybe you want to see what your wife's been up to. Jesse, we didn't have you on the podcast last week, but what was your interpretation of whether that was Mariko that slept with Blackthorn last week?
I thought it was, but then I listened to your because I watched the episode and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's her." And then I listened to your podcast. I'm like, maybe it wasn't. So I had to go back. So now I'm questioning as well. But I believed it was. I thought
I,
it
I think
was.
I think certainly based on this episode, the heavy
Yeah.
implication is that it was right.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think that they left just enough doubt that you could believe that it wasn't. But I
Mm-hmm.
think I think canonically it was.
Mm-hmm.
But
Indeed.
yeah, and so that would make Fuji's comments very pointed in this whole sequence. But then Buntaro, Blackthorn, Fuji, and Mariko meet over dinner. This is the main centerpiece of the episode. It goes on for like about half the episode.
Yeah.
And it's tense. Blackthorn presents rabbit stew, and everyone's super grossed out by it. And then they start mocking each other. Buntaro mocks Blackthorn's eating style, and Blackthorn mocks their sake cups, and they get into a drinking match. Pause here for a moment. I think the food in the show is really interesting, and how they depict the food. He presents this rabbit stew, which, by the way, I have to say, it looks kind of good to me.
Yeah. I thought it looked really nice.
Last week, it was either last week or the week before, Blackthorn had natto. Have you ever had natto, the Japanese soybean food?
No, I have not
I,
actually.
I have had it before, and it is not for me. But Blackthorn did a good job of describing it. It's like it tastes like kind of like very cheesy. It kind of tastes like
Mm.
this cheese, and I appreciated that Blackthorn was trying it. So
Yeah.
anyway,
I
yeah, go ahead.
I just like that the show uses food quite often as like a way to describe culture and showcase people's differing tastes and ability to connect. It's food is it's an often underutilized tool to like showcase characterization, but it's really used well here.
They get into a drinking match. And at some point, Buntaro gets so revved up, he shoots two arrows into the same fence post right near Mariko's face. And when Blackthorn steps in to defend Mariko, Buntaro asks Mariko to tell Blackthorn her story. Turns out Mariko's father killed Kurudo-sama, who was the corrupt leader before the previous Taiko. As a result, her whole family was hunted down, and her father was forced to kill her entire family before committing seppuku himself. Because Mariko was married, she did not have to fight, and Buntaro forces her to live. You can kind of tell, but neither of them are happy with this arrangement.
Hmm.
Buntaro feels like her presence is a stain on his honor, and obviously Mariko is not being treated particularly well in this situation.
Hmm.
So yeah, what did you think of this backstory, this entire scene? Any other comments on this whole sequence?
This whole relationship between Mariko, Blackthorn, and Buntaro is fascinating. I've just the complexities of it and how you see it all play out in this sequence, where you see Blackthorn attempting to be like a gracious host, but then having to go through Mariko, who will like soften his words, or like just the translation sequences in general of like how Mariko chooses to interpret Blackthorn's words, and other people's words back to Blackthorn is fascinating to me, especially as Mariko it plays a role in this dynamic as well. Like it's just it's so deliciously complicated. It also plays into like how Blackthorn holds himself. That like there's moments where Blackthorn's trying to be gracious, but Buntaro reads him as just like a savage, but then isn't like kind of gets into that drinking match through like the slurping of his food as well. So it's not just translation. It's a very intricate sort of dance between body language, words, and relationship dynamics that I think this sequence just masterfully plays upon in so many ways.
I agree. I think the translation scenes are so like I've never been so
Mhm.
riveted
Mhm.
by watching a translator, right? And
Mhm.
usually like the translator is a thing that the show or the film needs to get past. It's like an obstacle to deal with.
Mhm.
Oh, how do we get the audience engaged? But here, I am just so fascinated by what Mariko is saying, what she's thinking, how she's going to interpret what Blackthorn says to Buntaro and vice versa. It's a great way of taking what has typically been a liability in TV shows and films, and kind of turning it into an asset of, wow, these three characters have this interesting interplay with each other, and the translation layer is a really meaningful part of how they are
Mhm.
interacting. I just think it's so compelling and interesting.
Yeah.
I saw The Perfect Skeet today, which was by somebody named Depeche Joe on Blue Sky, and it was like, you know how some tweets are like a dialogue sequence between two characters. So this is a
Mhm.
dialogue sequence. So, Blackthorn says, "Tell Toranaga-sama that they are beating his ass in the quote tweets," and then Mariko-sama says, "The Anjin wishes to express concern at the reception of your most recent posts," which I just thought was like, that is an amazing
That is
depiction of that
hilarious.
dynamic.
Yeah.
So nicely done, Depeche Joe on Blue Sky. But
W
yeah,
w
that's essentially what it is. Is like both of these men saying horrible things to each other, and then Mariko trying to soften it right with
Yeah.
each person. So
There needs to be more movies that are and TV shows that deal with translation. The only other one that I can immediately think of is there's a French film that I really love called The Translators,
mhm.
um, which is
What's that about,
I
Jesse? No.
wonder. Yeah, it's a good thriller movie where like a bunch of it's just a thriller movie where a famous book needs to get translated into a bunch of different languages. So the publishing company, so it doesn't leak, shoves a bunch of different translators into a bunker, but then the book leaks, and so they have to like backtrace how it was translated
Mm.
and figure out like which one of them actually released the book early by figuring out how different things were translated and interpreted through the translating process. So it's an interesting sort of discussion on that. And I think more movies and TV shows should play with that.
I would say other movies that feature translators or translating in interesting ways. John Woo's Wind Talkers, not a very good movie, but
Mm.
like that was kind of a cool. Do you know what I'm talking about, Jesse Earl?
I have not seen that
You
one. No, no.
are you a John Woo fan though, Jesse? What do
I've
you
seen a
what do
few
you?
of his films, but I wouldn't
Oh, okay.
necessarily say I'm a huge fan, but I do know.
John Woo's like a god to me. So like
Mm.
I'm anyway, that was one of his not particularly successful American films, but also the Denis Villeneuve movie Arrival
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
had
Yep.
a big like translation component to it that was kind of interesting. So anyway,
Mm-hmm.
all right, back to this episode of Shogun. So Mariko, after being forced to explain her backstory, leaves abruptly, and then later Blackthorn is awakened by the sound of Buntaro beating her. Blackthorn then confronts Buntaro outside, and Buntaro asks for forgiveness for disturbing the harmony of his home.
Mm-hmm.
Later, Mariko and Blackthorn discuss their feelings about the situation, and we kind of, Mariko gets some of the best, most, I guess, poetic, elegiac lines of the whole show. We live and we die. We control nothing beyond that. She says that a few times, but she also says the line like, "I will give my husband nothing, not even my hatred, because that is what he merits." End quote. Really amazing line, amazing delivery by Anna Suai. So I think this was basically what we're seeing in this episode is Blackthorn's value system colliding with the value system of Japan, and
Mm-hmm.
he thought he had like kind of figured it out, but he learns this episode that he really doesn't have it figured out. He doesn't really understand it on any meaningful level.
Mm-hmm.
And Mariko says that they'll never basically speak again after this. That um, she thinks that she's decided, I have a job to do. I'm going to do it, and I'm not going to let any personal feelings get in the way of it. Any thoughts on the Mariko and Blackthorn conversation or relationship this episode, Jesse?
Well, I think yeah, it just goes to the heart of the entire themes of the series. I think it's the culture clash and value systems, like this, the difference in their values, as Mariko and Blackthorn sort of discuss them here, where Blackthorn sort of values freedom completely, freedom from anything, freedom from any being beholden to any ritual or person or group, versus Mariko, who is very much inundated with ritual and honor and what she uh, like the just the systems that she's within, and how they're both sort of limited by both of those perspectives. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that
Mm-hmm.
these two characters coming into contact with each other sort of represents the larger themes of the series of just how people interact with each other, translate each other, how people interpret other people's intentions through their own context rather than on the other person's context. So I think that is it's just a great dilution of that. And again, this is a really well done romance, I would even say. Romance might be the wrong word. Like, there's definitely some feelings between these two characters, and the show never takes a moment to be like, "Hey, they definitely have feelings for each other. Look at them being together." But you understand the subtext of this whole sequence of like Blackthorn has feelings for her, she has feelings for him, but it's complicated by all of these situations that they're within.
Yeah, the thing that I thought was most potent about that conversation was the idea that this desire for freedom itself is a trap.
Mm-hmm.
That they're like that valuing individualism and self-determination above all actually does come with downsides, as we have
Mm-hmm.
seen in the United States, right?
Yeah, very much
We
so.
have
Yeah.
seen that with I'll just say gun culture as an example. Like, just there's a huge cost to that,
Yeah.
and we are wreaking we are reaping the cost of that on a daily basis here in America. And so that was just fascinating in a way I'd never even heard it articulated in that way until this show, and I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, it's about the balance between individualism and community, because both
Right.
going to both extremes does
Yes.
mean you lose yourself. And so, like, where's the
Yes.
balance of that?
Yes.
Where do we care about others but also ourselves? So,
Absolutely, absolutely. Later, Blackthorn returns home and he learns that the rotting pheasant was creating a problem for the entire town, with some fearing that it was a Tataragami. So I did not know what a Tataragami. Did you know what a Tataragami was,
no,
Jessero?
no, no.
So I looked this up, and according to Wattpad, Tataragami are powerful spirits which bring death and destruction, fire and famine, plague,
Ooh.
war, and all forms of calamity. They are some of the most powerful evil spirits that haunt Japan and have done much to shape the culture and politics over the country's long history. End quote. So people potentially fearing that this rotting creature was bringing bad juju into the town. So anyway, turns out the townspeople decided something needs to be done about this. So his gardener, Uichio, decides to dispose of the pheasant, and as a result, is put to death because of the offhanded comment that Blackthorn made. Disgusted by their system of honor, Blackthorn tells all of his servants at home to go away. And I'm just going to go straight into, I want to talk about that scene, but I can just go
Yeah,
straight into the next scene, which is very,
kind
very
of
related,
contingent.
where at a meeting with Blackthorn, Toranaga, and Mariko, Blackthorn tries to ask Toranaga if he can leave because he's like, hey, I taught you how to use the cannon. I have fulfilled my end of the bargain. Time to get me and my men back. We're going to get on our way. And at that point, Mariko tries to figure out what's going on with Blackthorn, and Blackthorn's clearly upset because of the death of his gardener, who is, by all accounts, seemed like a pretty cool dude,
Mhm.
and then it comes out that it's because of this whole situation with the pheasant that Blackthorn is upset. By the way, I love that Toranaga just gets up and leaves halfway through the meeting.
He's like, I can't do
He's
it.
just like, I have other shit. I have other shit I need to do, like stare at this, like stare at my men over there in the in the valley.
Mhm.
All right, Jesse, this is a really interesting kind of situation. I was reading Episodic Medium, a great newsletter with Miles McNutt, about this episode, and one of the dangers that a show like this can fall into is re-perpetuating the white savior narrative, right?
Mhm.
And what that means is, like, white person comes in and masters a culture, and not only does he master the culture, but also he's got a few things of his own to teach him about how to
Mhm.
live life, you know? A-
Tom Cruise coming in and Last
Right.
Samurai.
Last time, right, right, and Avatar, all that stuff. Like, there's
Mhm.
there's many movies like that, and so what you don't want to see is a show or movie that kind of adheres to that very warmed over, not interesting, and borderline offensive trope.
Mhm.
And the question is, does this episode take steps towards the white savior narrative by showing Blackthorn's disgust at their system of honor? Uh and I was reading Episodic Medium, and they're saying, yeah, it kind of does, like, reinforce the white savior narrative. And honestly, Jesse, I'm just gonna say that was not my reaction to this at all.
Yeah,
My
that
my
neither
my
would near mine. Yeah.
my reaction was when that conversation that Mariko and Blackthorn have at the end, where she says, uh, you know, uh, the pheasant was meaningless, and she says, "Your words gave it meaning." Basically, like,
Mhm.
you gave it meaning, and it kind of forces Blackthorn to reconsider I think Blackthorn is the one learning in that situation. Like, it's not the
Yeah.
Japanese people learning. It's Blackthorn is learning, like, oh, I can't just say random shit, like,
Yep.
and expect every like life to keep going on normally. Like, I need to actually be serious about what I'm saying. I need to expect that people will take me literally and seriously. And so for me, it was like, wow, like, it's the Japanese that are educating Blackthorn, showing him that his words have meaning and he can't go willy nilly doing stuff. What but Jesse, I think there's also the possibility that people might watch this and be disgusted by the Japanese way of life in this situation. And
Mhm.
how dare you kill that old man for doing basically nothing wrong? So how do you think about all this went down, Jesse?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you completely on that read of it. I mean, you even get that scene earlier where he does learn that the gardener was killed, and I'm blanking on her name, but the Blackthorn's uh
Consort?
consort, yeah, she
Fuji? Yeah.
Fuji, yeah. She is so very clearly distraught by the fact that she had to do this because of his words.
Yes.
Like she plays it so well. You just see like she didn't want to do it, but because of the situation that Blackthorn created by his poor choice of words due to his lack of understanding and how to translate and just trying to like offhandedly say, oh, don't touch this death, just like simplifying it for people. I think what it goes to show again him understanding that his every action, every piece that he provides in this world is needs to be precise. And he is not a man who is very precise in
Right.
many ways.
Right.
And so I think that I think that is about him learning again and going back to the theme of language that we see throughout this whole series and translation and understanding. So I do think that it doesn't lean into the white savior narrative, but it kind of goes into the same thing of, I saw a lot of comments about the recent Dune movie as well, where people saying, oh, this is the white savior film. You have Paul in that movie being a white savior when the whole point of the movie, and I think the movie makes very
Yeah, so
clear.
we'll say we will spoil. We
Yeah,
will now
no,
spoil
no,
Dune 2. So like,
sorry, no major.
yeah,
I'll keep
yeah.
it. I'll keep it
Right.
fairly vague here. But like the point of that movie is to be a deconstruction of the white savior narrative. And I won't spoil exactly how that works within the movie, but it is meant to be that. But people are saying it was a white savior narrative, and it goes to sometimes this thing of like when you're deconstructing something, you're still depicting it, and so depicting it is it's the same thing I often see with like I see bury your gays trope with gay characters where people are like, oh, we're gonna subvert the bury your gays trope by like killing a gay character but bringing them back, or playing like or almost killing them and not bringing them back and not leading into it, but it's like but you're still playing it by those rules to subvert them, and so there is something to be said of by playing into this a white person judges another culture. You could have people, because the show is clearly made for a Western audience by nature of the fact that you see like them speaking English instead of Portuguese or something, that people will not read into it. And it's one of those, it's the conversation you always have about art, is like how much does the creator, the artist, need to hold your hand in helping interpret something between, or do they provide enough context within the show? Sometimes it is more important to bonk people on the head and say, this is what this is about. Sometimes it is more effective to be subtle, but you run the risk of people misunderstanding it. So I think that this episode does a masterful job of telling the story. And I think what will be more telling is how it sits within a larger context of the series. Because if it does end up being like, oh, Blackthorn by the end of the show, like rescues Japanese culture because he's able to understand something that they don't, and he provides something, then I'll come back to this moment later on and be like, oh, that was an inkling towards that read of the show. But I don't really think that that's the direction the show is going, nor the end thesis statement that it's going to end with. So I don't read this sequence in that way.
I would argue this is not even a depiction of the white savior. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're saying you need to depict it to deconstruct it. I would say this is not even a depiction of it, because I
Mm-hmm.
think that Blackthorn's perspective is rendered as it is Blackthorn that needs to do the learning in this
Mm-hmm.
situation. From my perspective, it's not shown as though like, oh wow, he needs to teach these barbaric Japanese people how to live. That's my interpretation of what the show is trying to say. Now you may have a different interpretation. We'd love to hear about it at decodingtv@gmail.com. But anyway, I just want to get your take on who is the one being educated here. Is it the
Yeah, I
Japanese
definitely
or the
is definitely
Blackthorn?
definitely Blackthorn.
That's my sense too. That's my sense too. But you could see if people thought it was the Japanese people being educated, that they might think this is more of a white savior show, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's what I
Yeah,
was sort of getting into. Just to clarify my statements too, it's like the beats of this at the top could lead into
yeah, yeah,
a
yeah. It
white
could
savior narrative. And so
absolutely.
like that's what I'm saying is like someone who has been inundated in this type of storytelling for a very long time, that, you know, Western culture has done the white savior story a bunch. They may, because we expect those beats, they may end up reading it that way regardless of what the show actually does do with those beats later on.
Yeah, let's check back in 5 weeks
Hmm.
and see where we
Hmm.
are. All right, a few other things to mention about what happens in this episode. A huge earthquake happens.
Jeez, talk about a
Pretty
cliffhanger.
pretty big, and I have to say, some of like not every shot was amazing, but some of the shots looked pretty spectacular.
Hmm.
Of these people just getting swallowed up by the ground, that was amazing. Toranaga is saved. Blackthorn gives him Fuji's father's swords to replace his previous ones. I thought that was an interesting step as well, because we learn early in the episode that Fuji's father's swords, she has this whole narrative about how they came to be that way, and the narrative is a lie, and it's a lie to preserve Fuji's dignity, and by kind of offering him her swords, it's kind of him again. It's him being like, I accept that like these swords have a story around them, and by passing them to Toranaga, I am continuing that story in some way. So
Hmm.
anyway, a
It comes
reinforcement of yeah. Go ahead.
it comes right off that lesson of like what you do gives things meaning.
Yeah,
So it comes right off of
absolutely.
that scene. So yeah,
Absolutely, yeah. All right. There is a subplot this episode with Yabushige and Toranaga. Yabushige, my favorite character in the show.
agreed.
He is the comedic relief of the show. He is so out of his depth. We did get an email at decodingtv@gmail.com. Somebody wrote, do you watch Succession, Jesse Earl?
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh Somebody named Dawn wrote into decodingtv@gmail.com with subject line, Yabushige is Tom Wamsgams.
Oh my gosh.
And then Don
Oh
wrote,
wow.
"That's it. That's it. That's the email." And now I can't stop thinking about that.
That is
That's very apt.
perfect.
Yeah, yeah. He is the Tom Wamsgams of the show. If you've seen Succession, he's basically like this guy who is completely out of his depth, trying to play all sides and failing horribly doing so. But anyway, Toranaga accuses Yabushige of manipulating his son into attacking Jozen from last week, because Toranaga knows his son ain't that smart. But Yabushige reveals it was his nephew that did it, and turns out Toranaga is actually happy about the result. As a result, Yabushige's nephew Omi gets control of the artillery, but he also needs to find Toranaga's spy. In one of the final scenes of the episode, Toranaga's actual spy, Tonomoto Akinao, manages to frame the dead gardener Uijio of being the spy. So that's the end of that chapter. I'm sure we're not going to hear any more about that subplot ever again.
Yeah, never.
But anyway, yeah, my one complaint about this episode, not enough Yabushige.
Yeah.
He is my favorite character, and he's always trying to say the right thing. Like that's the thing you get is from the show is characters are always trying to say the right thing and failing.
Mhm.
Like Yabushige with Toranaga, and then later on, Omi offers Yabushige. He's like, "Hey, if you want control of the artillery, Uncle, you can have it." And he's like, "How dare you imply I didn't already have control?" You know, like that is kind of a thing in this world where people are always fearful of making the wrong move,
Mhm.
and that's often why it's better to just shut the fuck up, in this
Yeah.
situation. So,
That
yeah, go
scene where
ahead.
Yabushige just has to be like, "Oh yeah, well I'll discipline my
My
what was
nephew.
it, my nephew," and then Toranaga's like, "Oh no, he did great. It was really helpful." Like, and then he'd be like, "Yeah, that was definitely what I was thinking." And the way Yabushige plays that moment, he's just like, I hate. You just see it on his face of like, I know I was just caught in some BS, and I just have to go along with it, and I hate everything. Just
Yeah,
it's just wonderful.
yeah, it's amazing to see. All right, we also get a few scenes with the regents this episode. They have a difficult time figuring out who to replace Toranaga with. They start descending into infighting. Ishido receives Josen's head in the mail, so that's a thing that happens.
Mhm.
And at the end of the episode, Lady Ochiba, who is the mother of the heir of the kingdom, heir to the kingdom, she returns to Osaka. She's impatient for the council to be restored and decides she's going to seize control herself, ending the episode by saying, "The council will answer to me," end quote. Yeah, we don't really know that much about that character at this point, so
Mhm.
like, I don't know how that's all going to play out, but it definitely is going to be a complicating factor. Jesse, Earl, any thoughts on how this episode ends and what's going on with the regions?
Same with you. I'm curious to see how she's gonna play out. We don't know enough about her. What I will say is that scene was creepy. Like that whole sequence was filmed.
Yeah.
Like I was like, dang, this suddenly became a kind of a horror movie vibe with her character. So I think that was a very powerful. I think we've seen her before, in maybe a flashback or something like that. But regardless, it's a really strong introduction to her character. I was like, woof, dang, this just terrifying.
Yeah. Before we get to any closing thoughts, Jesse Earl, you want to let people know where they can find more of your work on the internet this week?
Yeah, you can find me at Jesse Gender on YouTube. If you just type in Jesse Gender, you'll find my channel. I had a recent video go out about, we were speaking about right-wing stuff earlier. There was an anti-trans propaganda film made by a right-wing cult. It was a really terrible movie with some terrible acting, but I go through and use it as a way to like not only just make fun of the movie, but to educate about trans issues. So check out that video if you're interested in that. I'm on all the social medias, Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram are the main ones. And then you can also follow me at Nebula, which is the streaming service made for a bunch of YouTubers that I mentioned before, that will be releasing my movie Identities, which is a sci-fi cyberpunk film that'll be releasing later this year that I'm super excited about. So I'll talk more about that when it gets closer.
Big fan of all the stuff Jesse puts out, and super grateful that she stepped in for Patrick Klepek this week.
Yeah.
It's greatly appreciated. And of course, I do want to mention if you enjoy this podcast, you can become a paid member at decodingtv.com, get early access to episodes, ad-free episodes, and bonus episodes. Everyone I work with at Decoding TV, Patrick Klepek, Jesse Earl, gets paid. And it is because of the paid subscribers that we're able to do that. So become a paid member at decodingtv.com, help support the podcast, and help to keep it going long into the future. All right. Jesse Earl, any closing thoughts on this episode? I think, or anything that I didn't mention or pick up on. I agree with you that the final sequence was really creepy. I am curious how Lady Ochiba, another player entering the game, is going to confuse things. But I do just want to give a shout out to Toranaga again for resigning from the Council of Regents, because he just knew that the reason they wouldn't be able to execute him is because they are sticklers for the bylaws of the council. You know,
Mhm.
like they're like, man, we really want to kill Toranaga, but gotta follow these bylaws that we gotta have 5 people to vote on this thing. You know, so I appreciate that he was using the bureaucratic system against them.
Yeah.
But yeah, anything else to mention about this episode, or any other closing thoughts?
No, I think we hit all the major things. I'm so excited for this show. Like this is just a meaty show where I could talk for so long about every single episode. So yeah, fantastic show. Excited for next week and excited to hear you and Patrick talk about it next week.
I think they have said that the show ends where the book ends. The season ends where the book ends,
Oh,
and so
interesting.
they have no plans for another season, which I just like
Really?
is really that was
Oh man, that
for,
saddens me.
yeah, that's sad. I mean, it's good to go out on top, but I it's just so much work goes into creating a show like this, like having creating the look of it, casting it. I'm a little bit surprised that there's no kind of immediate plans to continue it. But also, we've seen many shows continue past when they should have.
Hmm.
And like a show is based off. The one that comes to mind is Big Little Lies, the
Mm.
HBO series.
No.
Um,
The one I was thinking was Supernatural, which went 10 seasons too long. But
but that was based off a 2014 novel of the same name, Big Little Lies, and and they were like, hey, yeah, we're gonna end it right, and like it's meant to be a limited series, and that's it, and it ended, and I was like, oh, that's a pretty good show, and then they did a second season, which, despite having Meryl Streep, was kind of a disaster in my opinion,
mhm.
and so I really hope that they don't extend it past the shelf life. At the same time, yeah, I mean, one of my favorite shows that has aired in the course of the last few years, and so I would
Yeah.
love for it to continue somehow. So we'll see how things evolve. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.